Hi everyone, my current issue topic is called antibiotic use on factory farms and its effects on public health. I want to make mention of the picture in the corner on the right hand side, just a little tidbit to start us off, that antibiotic resistance could kill every 3 seconds by the year 2050. So farmers' utilization of antibiotics on their livestock is really not a new idea. Antibiotic use has been in practice since the 1940s, and it's been mainly for the purpose of treating infections, decreasing the incidence of diseases, and the prevention of death. So since the 1950s, livestock producers have been apparently incorporating low levels of antibiotics into the feed or water of cattle and swine in order for them to prevent infections from occurring. However, even though the use of antibiotics were originally used to treat infections, there's been a sharp increase in the use of antibiotics in farm animals, especially in poultry, in the latter half of the 20th century. The purpose was to boost economic benefit due to the fact that antibiotics could also serve as growth hormones. And as you can see in the little picture on the right-hand side of the screen, there have been quite a dramatic change in chickens. Since 1957, they are much smaller compared to chickens that were raised in 2005. So at the end of the century, there's more than 70% of all antibiotics that were produced were in fact consumed by farm animals. And in 2014, pharmaceutical companies had sold close to 21 million pounds of this antibiotics for food animal use. So in actuality, there were more antibiotics that were sold for food animals than there were for humans. So factory farming, it first began in the 1920s, especially after when farmers discovered that they could put vitamin A and D into their animal feed. So the addition of the vitamins to the feed meant that they no longer had to expose the animals to sunlight or exercise outdoors in order for the food animals to grow. But unfortunately, what this means is that many of the animals became subject to indoor living year-round. So in present day, factory farming is considered the practice of raising thousands of animals in close confinement in high density with the purpose of producing meat, eggs, or milk in the fastest, most efficient, and cheapest way possible for human consumption. So as it became increasingly popular, there were more and more animals were kept indoors. This started the issue of overcrowding in confined areas in order for them to maximize profit, which of course paves the way to the rapid spread of disease. And what happens is, as one animal contracts the disease, other animals that are in close proximity of this infected animal will contract it, and so on and so forth until the entire population contracts the contagion. So the attempts to reduce this type of disease spread, they used antibiotics in factory farming as a thing of commonplace. So every farmer started utilizing this practice regularly. So by using the antibiotics to fight disease spread by overcrowding, they could still increase their productivity without having to worry about producing animals that are unhealthy. So many farms, they became industrial farms, and they were deemed a corporate agribusiness type of an institution. The farmers were required to agree to a contract that was set by the corporation. And what happened is this takes control out of the hands of the farmer and into the hands of the corporation. And according to what I've read, a whopping 90 to 95% of U.S. poultry farmers and 48% of hog farmers are in fact contract growers. So a short definition of antibiotics. Antibiotics are essentially a group of antimicrobial substances that are used to treat bacterial infection. They help to slow the growth of bacteria and also as a prevention of disease. They are typically classified as a broad spectrum, which treats a wide range of infections, and you also have narrow spectrum, which treats a limited range of infections. And there are actually several types of antibiotics that are used in animal food. Some of the major ones, I've listed one here as the cephalosporin. It is similar to penicillin, and it treats infection. You also have penicillin, and it was the first antibiotic actually to be discovered that inhibits bacterial cell wall formation, and it is also useful in treating sinusitis and a chronic respiratory disease in poultry. There's also tetracycline that prevents bacteria from multiplying while the animal's immune system is dealing with an original infection that it had. So what's interesting is that sales of these antibiotics increased by 31% from 2009 through 2015. The problem, though, is that bacteria are capable of resisting antibiotics. So if they have one type of antibiotic that they are being exposed to, they can develop an ability to become resistant to that antibiotic. And then you run into, if you choose a different antibiotic but it's similar to the original antibiotic, you will have issues with treating the bacteria with that one as well. I wanted to include this graph to show how percentages have changed in the U.S. with the use of antibiotics. In 2009, it was, as you can see, really low, and up to 2014, it's quite a hike. I also wanted to show this bar graph about farm antibiotics being shown how they're being used and how much is being used globally. And you can see China is the absolute highest in 2010 and will in fact be the highest by 2030. So when farm animals are routinely given antibiotics in their feed, the bacteria that are living in the animal's gut, skin, and respiratory tract have the ability to become resistant to those antibiotics and can easily spread from animals to the public in several ways, especially when it comes to our food supply. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria are transported from farms to slaughterhouses where the meat's distributed for consumer purchase in grocery stores. Bacteria, they are also not confined to just livestock. Bacteria also have the ability to spread to farmers, farm workers, and rural residents, or the general population. And studies have shown that strains of antibiotic-resistant bacteria in farmers are similar to the strains that are found in their livestock. So thriving bacteria, they can also spread through the environment and thereby contributing to a reservoir of antibiotic resistance in rural environments. They can also be spread by wind, livestock transport, flies, and other animals. And you run the risk of getting food poisoning from contaminated meat that you've purchased if it is ridden with bacteria. Also, you have the issue of cross-contamination. There's also cross-contamination due to ground, say for example ground beef. It can actually be made from multiple cows. So in that respect, cross-contamination, if you have purchased some ground beef, you would not be able to pinpoint where that bacteria came from, because what happens is a lot of times you have ground beef from various cows, so it's not very easy to pinpoint where exactly you may have gotten that bacteria from. Some of these antibiotic-resistant bacteria, such as Salmonella and E. coli, can cause disease in the human population. There was a study that was conducted by FDA scientists back in 2012 that analyzed raw meats from retailers, and they found 84% in chicken breast, 82% in ground turkey, 69% in ground beef, and 44% of pork chops that contained E. coli. So the other problem is you have what's called superbugs that can also develop as a result of animals that are treated with antibiotics. And these superbugs are hard to treat because they become resistant to antibiotics. And the numbers of antibiotics out there to treat is very hard to come by. As you can see by this little picture I put in here, back in the 1980s, you had 29 new antibiotics were approved, whereas in the 2000s there are only 9. So you have 2 million Americans that are getting serious infections caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and essentially of 23,000 people die each year as a direct result of these infections. So what can we do as a population to prevent this from happening to us? Well, they recommend that you take antibiotics only when it's necessary, only when you have to have an antibiotic, and take the entire prescription. You don't want to keep some for another time. You want to look for labels on products that say that the animal was not treated with antibiotics or hormones, such as USDA certified organic. You want to prepare food safely. You don't want to cross-contaminate. You don't want to cross-contaminate raw food with cooked food. And you don't want to undercook your meat. You want to cook them thoroughly. Also, you want to make sure that you wash your hands with soap and water thoroughly after you've handled raw meat. Education is very important. You need to educate the public as well as healthcare professionals on the issue of the overutilization of antibiotics in our food production. Also, it is a good idea to contact local congressional delegates for legislative support. Try to get legislation to stop the utilization of antibiotics in our food animal supply. And lastly, what you could do is, instead of eating meat, you can become a vegetarian if that is a choice that you feel comfortable with. Okay, I want to thank you for your participation in learning about antibiotic resistance in factory animal farming and how it affects public health. If you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to email me. I would appreciate that, and I thank you.